right. I guess I'll get started because one piece of feedback I got last time was we waited too long after we started the feeds. Aileen will jump in here shortly. And thank you for watching, everybody. We've got 8 people on Instagram so far, and at least one person logged in watching on YouTube, but probably 1,000 people not logged in watching as well. So we are joined today by Hai Tran, who is a sommelier in Philadelphia, and Ben Jordan, winemaker from Early Mountain Vineyards, and Aileen Sevier, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, she'll correct me when she jumps on here. Also from Early Mountain Vineyards, Director of Marketing. We're going to taste their 2008 and the 2015 Linden Hardscrabble Chardonnay, 2 of my favorite white wines, period. Not just from Virginia, but period. So, hi, where'd you go?
Give me a second.
Oh, okay.
Battery died and realized I pulled the charge, which is a problem.
Hey, Aileen.
Charged.
We got you. So while Hai does that, I'll just kind of intro him. Hai and I met, we were trying to think, 2013. We were at the Capital Wine School, and it was at Saint Bordeaux. And Hai came up from North Carolina, where he was living and working at the time. So, you know, super impressive. You know, I could tell right then he was a good follow on Instagram at Som Say Hai. I think he's trying to set the Guinness World Record for most number of wine webinars during quarantine attended. So if you're looking for some wine education, just check out Hai on Instagram. He's probably posting all about it, and you can kind of go from there. Here he comes.
Sorry about that. I promise that won't happen again. Yeah, I heard that on the IG live feed.
That was
Is there feedback because of the noise? I can't get my tablet to completely mute. So.
Yeah, me neither.
All right. Maybe we give up on this IG live thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
so hey, if you're
that,
watching
guys.
on Instagram, we're going over to YouTube. Just go over to YouTube. Links in my bio.
Link in my bio too.
All right.
All right. Sorry about that. Let's now that we got the technical difficulties out of the way.
That's all right.
Cool.
All right. So hi.
You're watching yourself on the screen.
Tell us kind of how you got there, how you got into wine. Tell us about how you got to North Carolina, how you got into wine, and how you got to Philadelphia.
So how I got to North Carolina. I got to North Carolina because of my undergrad. I went to Duke University, go Blue Devils. While I was studying there and so on and so forth, I realized that, you know, the path that I was set on wasn't exactly what I had the most passion for. But I was always raised in kind of a hospitality-like background. My mom had always worked fast food, and she really instilled a hard set of values in myself and my brother. So I did what everyone that's, you know, freshly graduated out of undergrad, don't know what to do with your life. I started waiting tables, you know, just to start paying the bills and get things going. And that's where, you know, eventually that path got me into wine. What really got me into wine was, you know, basically attending a wine trade tasting. And I was tasting like a line of wines going around. You know, at that time, I didn't even know what tasting was. So I didn't even know you were supposed to spit. So I was drinking everything. At one point, I got to a point where I was like, oh man, this is a lot of wine. But then I got to a table where they're pouring all these Pinot Noirs. Back then I call it Pinot Noir, but you know, how I've matured since then. And I was tasting them, and then there was this one particular bottle with a triangle on it. If you know which I'm talking about. I'm sure you know the label. It's coming from Santa Barbara, hint, hint. And I tasted the wine, and I was like, wow, what's so special about this wine? There's something unique about it. And the guy behind the table was like, yeah, you know, there's this whole notion of terroir and, you know, the land and place and the winemaker and how everything kind of comes in hand. And he was talking about the vintage. He was talking about what the winemaker did. And that really drew me in because I realized every single bottle of wine has its own story to tell. And I've always loved knowing about the whys of things and the hows of things. So I really jumped in headlong into that and looked up everything. Back then, you know, we didn't have the vast resources we have now as far as the internet is concerned. So I jumped on the forums and saw what all the collectors were drinking, you know, whether it be the Wine Spectator forums or there's another forum called Wino Depot. I used to see what they're drinking and follow along. I go to as many tastings as I could and educate myself as best my ability. I became known as like the little Asian kid with the faux hawk because I had a faux hawk back in the day. I always walked around with headphones in. And the reason why is because I was very scared to talk to people. And I didn't want people to like, you know, look down on me because I was a young minority that was in a wine shop, something that was, you know, probably wasn't a very common sight, especially in North Carolina. And I didn't know how people would react to me. So I pretended to be listening to music, but the whole time I was listening to every single thing everyone was talking about, whether it be at a tasting or whether it be, you know, a salesman, I was just selling to other people and try to pick up as much as I could that way, as well as supplement my education as I went along. So that's the long story short of how I got into wine, why I got into wine, and how it eventually led me on the path. So
cool, awesome. So we're obviously here. We're going to talk about some Virginia wine. What are your? I know you've had some Virginia wine. You've worked with a little bit in Pennsylvania, but any thoughts kind of coming into this talk that you have about the category?
Yeah, so, you know, my exposure really started in North Carolina. You know, we were always big into supporting local, but for me, local wasn't just North Carolina. It was like the whole, you know, Eastern Seaboard and trying, you know, showcase and highlight the best that the Eastern Seaboard had to offer. And that immediately kind of took me from going to North Carolina into Virginia as well. And I got exposed to wines like, you know, Barboursville, Linden, Boxwood, RDV, and I really got excited about like, you know, what the potential was there. And there's definitely some really amazing values as well as some really well-made wines, despite like the really kind of crazy conditions that you know winemakers and vineyard growers workers have to deal with on a year-to-year basis in Virginia. So yeah.
Cool.
So,
all right.
I'm really excited to hear what Dan has to say about the wines, the vintages, and I brought him there too because I think it's always a fascinating story to hear.
Cool. Let's jump to Early Mountain, since we have two lovely people from Early Mountain. Let's talk to Aileen first, if you're ready. So Aileen, hi, how are you?
I'm awesome. How are you guys?
I'm good. It's good to see you. Thank you for jumping in real fast.
Yeah.
So you're Director of Marketing at Early Mountain, which means you are the best person in the world to tell the story about Early Mountain, at least in job description. So can you just kind of tell us? Yeah, for sure. Can you just tell us a little bit about Early Mountain and kind of, you know, where you guys are with just kind of, you know, the 3 to 5 minute kind of stick on Early Mountain for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Early Mountain is in Madison, Virginia. So that's right in central Virginia in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're about 40 minutes north of Charlottesville on your way to DC. And we have a 300 acre property there, gorgeous tasting room, full service restaurant. When we're open, we'll get be able to welcome people back hopefully at some point soon. 35 acres in the ground there and another 20 acres on a mountain vineyard site about 8 miles away. And Early Mountain was founded and started in 2012. Although the history on the property goes back actually to the 1700s to a Revolutionary War general, Joseph Early, for whom the property's named. Founded by Jean Case and her husband, Steve. And basically they're tech entrepreneurs. So some of you may know Steve Case as the CEO of AOL. And with their entrepreneurship, minds on, they were tasting around Virginia wine and just discovering all of this amazing quality. But they felt like the story wasn't yet being told, not even in DC at that point, going back 10 years ago. And so as entrepreneurs, they really felt the best way they could help tell that story was to buy a winery, to invest in it, and to really have the mission to be not only to focus on the highest quality wine possible there, but also to really help tell a broader story as part of their mission. So in our tasting room, we don't just serve Early Mountain wines. We have what's called the Best of Virginia program. So as I'm out or Ben's out and we're tasting with friends in the industry, when we taste something great that we think our customers would love to experience, we buy it, we showcase it in the tasting room, put together really interesting flights of wines, and also have a chef on the team so that we can be pairing foods focused on artisan products within Central Virginia. And then we are also really focused on that mission of going out to restaurants, to wine shops, and distributing our wines, as far afield as we can to really help spread the word. So
cool.
That's my quick snapshot. I could obviously keep going, but I'm super excited We're tasting Petit Manseng because I think that that's a great, speaking of telling a broader story and a Virginia story, to me, that's a grape that really tells what's possible in Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've been on this, Petit Manseng and Petit Verdot kind of kick for a few years now from Virginia. The wines are not disappointing at all. So let's transition now to Ben. Ben is the winemaker at Early Mountain, and Ben is one of those guys that I've gotten to know over a few years. And when Ben talks, you should probably listen. Definitely when it comes to Virginia wine and stuff like that, he's a wealth of knowledge. So Ben, thanks for being here. Can you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to Early Mountain, and maybe jumping into your thoughts about Petit Manseng kind of as a grape in general?
Sure. I usually start talking about after graduating college, but I went to Duke as well, so I figured I'd point that out.
Awesome.
How did that happen?
Small world.
Probably different years, but
No,
after
I'm sure
that,
you're like a few years before me.
After that, so this is the quick meander of my history into wine. After that, I moved to San Francisco, was a bike messenger for a few years. Just wanted to live in San Francisco. Then went to grad school to study playwriting and got my MFA in playwriting. And moved to New York because that's what you do. And then got a job selling wine because that's what you do because no one's paying you for writing plays. And there that's where I fell for wine, had a really good mentor who basically really leveraged the fact that we were in New York and the wines of the world were coming there, and just fell for it. And at the same time, my family was starting to do experimental blendings in the Shenandoah Valley for wine, grapes for wine. And so I figured I should move back out to San Francisco and get a little bit closer to production out there. Worked for an importer out there for a few years, and then moved up to Sonoma County and started working, basically worked harvest for a small winery in the Russian River, got hired on, and learned the craft of winemaking in the Russian River and in Dry Creek. And I came back in 2012, and making wines pretty much the same around the world. You're turning grape sugar into alcohol, but the growing of the grapes is pretty different here than it is in California. So had to learn a lot quickly coming here. I landed with Michael Shaps at Wineworks, and he does a lot with fruit from all over the state. So it was a bit of a boot camp for what is Virginia, and learned a lot in the time with him. Got to make a lot of different types of wines, and then came to Early Mountain in 2015, and have been here since. And we've got 50 acres that we farm, plus we have some relationships with other growers that, when they have interesting sites with interesting fruit, we'll make wines from different places. So we're doing both the grower own thing and searching out interesting sites as well.
Cool. Petit Manseng, how do you like working with it? I guess is kind of a good broad question.
I mean, the short answer is I love it. It's probably my favorite grape to work with in Virginia. And the reason for that is, well, backing up a little bit, my first experience with Petit Manseng was when I landed at Wineworks in 2012. And that was after 2011, which those of us that been paying attention to Virginia realized that was prior to 2018. That was the last really challenging vintage. It was a washout. And so I came in and I was tasting through the cellar of 2011s, which was, after, having kind of a California palate, it's an adjustment to come into Virginia anyway. But in a vintage that was so light, like 2011, it was a big shock. But the thing that really caught my eye was every time I tasted a Petit Manseng, it stood well above everything else. It had really performed well in the vintage. So, prior to that, I knew it through Jurançon and not very well, but I was immediately attracted to it and started talking to Michael about it. And he's like, yeah, it's a cool grape. It works here. And that year he decided he wanted to make his first dry Petit Manseng. And so I got to be a part of that. And part of what I love about it is that it is a challenge to make dry. So it has this ability to get very high sugar, so high potential alcohol relatively quickly while maintaining profound acidity. And so, especially when you're looking at it versus Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc in Virginia, the acid just seems so different. You're in the vineyard and you're tasting grapes, the acid seems so different. And so I think part of the challenge is getting your head out of Chardonnay land, out of Sauvignon Blanc land, out of Viognier land, and understanding it's its own thing. And being over there in Petit Manseng land is just a different approach to things. So part of it is the challenge of finding this sweet spot, this balanced spot of not having your alcohol get out of control while having acid that is digestible, that is, approachable to people. And that's been a bit of a journey for me and for Early Mountain. And that's part of the fun of the grape, is just the evolution of Petit Manseng and how we're dealing with it. But the other thing, not just it being about an experience, but being about an actual wine and the pleasure of wine, it has this ability, especially in Virginia, to bring richness, concentration, power in a land that's, our whites and our rosés are generally more known for elegance and being light on their feet. So it has this ability to take you into a more concentrated place, which, as you guys know, when you're dealing with it on the table, offers up like a whole different pairing atmosphere, and just it's a whole another toolbox in terms of wines. And so, but in terms of our evolution at Early Mountain, the big thing that we have done is to kind of understand that acidity, while profound, is actually buffered by the richness and the alcohol, and that you can embrace it. And then there are some things you can do to moderate it. Like I would have never thought that full malo on Petit Manseng was appropriate because of the flavors of Petit Manseng, but as long as you can manage the diacetyl flavors, it can actually work really well.
Diacetyl being the flavors of butter and cream and stuff like that.
Right.
Gotcha.
So, and the way we found to best manage that is by having long fermentations, which we kind of happened upon by embarking upon native yeast fermentations with Petit Manseng. And because of its challenge as a grape of being higher in alcohol and high in acid, it has these long primary fermentations that can last up to 12 months. And so if you leave a wine to its own devices for that long, a lot of times it'll resolve its diacetyl, its buttery flavors, as opposed to putting it in a bottle soon after fermentation, where it's all that diacetyl is trapped there with it. Not to get too far into the technical things, but things like that, along with lees aging, a little bit of skin contact, and then just embracing its inherent acidity are
cool.
What we do.
Awesome. So Hai, can you just kind of run us through this wine? Just kind of tell us, give us a little like sensory kind of evaluation, kind of, little sight, smell, taste kind of thing. What do you think the highlights of the wine are? And then before Ben has to leave, maybe we can talk about the vintage real quick after that.
Sure. So real quick, Ben, I just want to say, like, I've had only a small sample of like Eastern Seaboard style Petit Manseng. And the one thing I always like, you kind of hit the nail on the head with like what I was thinking about when I first saw the bottle of the wine, was that you did a really great job. I felt like of balancing the alcohol with the natural like acidity and richness that the grape has to offer. Because I've had most of the ones I've had before are all in that, around that like 13.5, 14. This one sits in right around 12 and 12.8, and I think that's pretty phenomenal. I think it has a really great balance left to it without any greenness that I thought it was going to have, or it's going to not have like that richness. And I think that's still very much there. But this is a wine that really kind of just brings you in from the get-go on the nose. It has like this beautiful, slight kind of honeyed citrus, tropical fruit kind of quality to it with subtle spices. And then you put on the palate and you're like, oh, wait, it's not as sweet as I thought it was going to be. It has this like, mouth-watering acidity, has this richness that really kind of coats your mouth, and really kind of, I think, makes sense when you're talking about the mallow component now that I know that, that's why where all that richness and that kind of that mouth coating feeling is coming from. But I think also at the same time, like, I think this has, a world of potential with potential pairings. In the past when I've had, Petit Manseng and I'd use it on pairings, which I actually did in North Carolina, believe it or not. I think it does really beautifully with, like really kind of like, whether it be like a fresh salad with like a goat cheese base, or whether it be like a beautiful kind of rich, like a fish dish, and maybe leading into some like some beautiful like pork tenderloin, a roast of some sort in that realm. So I think there's definitely a broad range that you can transverse and hopefully get this wine on the table for other guests to enjoy. So. You broke out when I can't hear you.
You're on mute.
My bad.
Okay, there you
So, sorry. Well said, dude. I would also say that, if anyone watching doesn't know, Petit Manseng's seminal home is in Jurançon, which is in southwestern France. Pretty similar climate to Virginia. Lots of similar struggles with moisture and stuff like that. So no real surprise that it does well, and historically made in a sweet style for sure. And those wines are really sommy. I think I mean that as a compliment. And other wines that are really sommy are Chenin Blanc from the Loire. And I feel like the acid profile is, kind of similar, flavor profile too. I think that these fruits, that they naturally, I don't know if Petit Manseng naturally oxidizes, kind of like Chenin does, but it always has a little bit like a bruised or grilled fruit note to it, which is really, really delicious. And that acid, it kind of like, it starts out and it just kind of creeps up and creeps up and creeps up. And then all of a sudden you're like drowning in saliva, in a good way, of course. Yeah, so we're drinking, or we're tasting the 2018, which if anyone watching lived in Virginia or DC, you had your umbrella with you like every single day. So Ben, can you kind of talk about what you had to do in that vintage with Petit Manseng, or just kind of in general, to kind of battle that?
Yeah, and before I forget, I call Petit Manseng the Chenin of the South because it does have some similarities. It's obviously a different grape in the end, but that's what I call it. So 2018 was actually an easy vintage for Petit Manseng. It was tough for everything else, but it taught us a lot about the way to deal with Petit Manseng. 2019, which is a great vintage and overall, was actually more challenging, and we had to really work harder with Petit Manseng. But the reason is because of that higher potential alcohol, the rain actually moderates it. So, and on top of that, it's a grape you don't have to worry about when it gets rained on. It actually likes the rain. It wants the rain. Unless you're talking about trying to make something very high bricks for a dessert wine, you are actually looking for a thunderstorm or something to help moderate it, which for every other grape in the world, I feel like that's just, it's the polar opposite. It's the mirror image of the way we think about things. And so I think even for us in Virginia, it's hard for us to think, oh, you know what, maybe I should go out and pick that grape the day after it rains, when every other grape you're letting dry out. So it's almost like you're working with the climate, the terroir of Virginia to make the grape be at its right place by using the weather in the way that most winemakers are using the sun to get concentration in their grapes and picking right before the rain. With Petit Manseng, you're using the rain to moderate your levels of sugar and acid by picking after the rain. And so in 2018, that was very easy because you're right, there were many umbrella days. And that's why you see that below 13% alcohol. That is actually, that's probably an abnormality for a dry Petit Manseng. That said, with the way we're starting to pick, and because we're able to do mallow and moderate acidity, we are picking earlier than we used to. In 2015, we made a Petit Manseng. It was about 15% alcohol. And then we dialed back about half a degree.
Sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, it's impressive. It hits your palate and you're like, oh, there's a lot there, but it was too much. So we've realized that we can usually get it under 14. It's really 13 to 14% that is in that sweet spot of not having too much acid and still being a dry wine. But that whole kind of light bulb moment of understanding, like, even though everyone in the world has told you it's wrong to pick the day after the rain, you can do it with Petit Manseng, and that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Cool, awesome. So there's a good question here on YouTube that I might throw to Aileen. So Ben, I know you got to go pretty soon. So if you got to go, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Look forward to having some more of your wines, and hopefully we can see each other soon.
Cool.
Aileen, so question on YouTube says, how do you market Petit Manseng to being such an uncommon grape?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that today, first of all, we're in a really special place with new wines. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, I think the wine consumer in the United States was not necessarily as open-minded. And, they were much more tied to grape varieties they had heard of. But there's been such an interest in indigenous grape varieties in Italy and Sicily and, up and coming wine regions in Eastern Europe. And so there's just a much more open-minded consumer right now. The other advantage is we host many of our customers directly in front of us. So we can tell the story right to them. And to me, Petit Manseng in Virginia is almost an easier story to tell than Chardonnay in Virginia. So Chardonnay, most popular wine in America. But then we're talking about a comparison between us in Burgundy, us in California, us in these styles that, people have a perspective about. And so what I love about Petit Manseng is it gives us a chance to really own and lead with something that is so suited to our place. Also suited to our weather, suited to a wide variety of global cuisines. So there's just so many different angles to talk about it. You can talk about how it's much more, in some ways, ecologically friendly, because when you're, have something that's very disease resistant in our vineyards and our climate, you're able to touch it less. I mean, our viticulturalist Maya always says it allows her to be lazy in the vineyards, and who wouldn't love that? So there's really, I think there's just such a wide variety of ways to tell that story. And then, with Psalms, I always love to provide, what are the nuggets? Petit Manseng, it's the opposite of petite. I love that these grapes that have the name Petit, meaning they have small berries, are those grape varieties that tend to be the most robust, the most intense, the most concentrated, because of the high proportion of skins in the, in the mix.
Yeah, that is super interesting. Petit Syrah, Petit Verdot, all that stuff. Yeah, for sure. So speaking of your location, Hai and I wanted to have a little discussion about Appalachians in Virginia. You guys, I'm going to share a little map right now. You guys, as you said, are located in Madison, which, as you can see, is right in the middle of the screen there, should be at least.
Yep.
So you guys are not in any AVA other
Correct.
than Virginia, which is not technically an AVA, but we can get into that later. What do you guys think about new AVAs in Virginia? Do you want to be in one? Do you think just saying you are from Virginia is great enough? Or what are your guys' thoughts about that?
So from the standpoint of Early Mountain, our physical winery being in an AVA, it's not, right now, AVAs in Virginia haven't dialed in to the place where they are truly capturing, a very specific terroir. many AVAs in the United States aren't yet, you know, and really it takes being a wine producing area, I think, for decades before you can really get to that point where you're dialing in further and further from Russian River Valley down to, you know, Western Sonoma Coast down to, you know, it just takes a lot of time to really understand and draw those lines so that they're truly associated with common growing conditions and, you know, tell a real stylistic story. Historically, the AVAs in Virginia are most tied to tourism. You know, they're tied to kind of wine trails. And that doesn't tell a lot about a style. My dream is that we will create an AVA, because I started in Virginia wine 2 years ago. I worked prior to that for an importer, Terlato Wines. I was managing a portfolio of 18 wineries for them, working with multi-generational family wineries in a lot of the most established, most high-end regions around the world, Hermitage and Champagne and Brunello. And to me, what got me excited about working in Virginia was working with Ben, working with telling a story like Petit Manseng, but also being part of, you know, the folks who figure out what is the elevator pitch, what matters to people, what's going to really help them understand how to differentiate quality Virginia wine. And to me, the elevator pitch really comes down to mountain fruit. Mountainside vineyards is really where you can generally have quality in Virginia. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors, and that's a real summary point. But I think that AVAs looking down the road are going to be tied to elevation, are going to be tied to soil type, are going to be tied to these things that really offset some of the challenges of growing in our climate. And so we're not there yet. We're not ready to say, here's exactly what we think, what should be drawn where. But I'm excited to be part of the generation of people that are going to be figuring that out.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hi. Anything else you want to say about this wine, or any other questions you had for me or Aileen about Early Mountain?
No, I think as a whole, I think, you know, when we think of the East Coast, when we think of, you know, Virginia wine, when we think of North Carolina wine, Pennsylvania wine, whatever, we got to break out of that whole mentality of like wanting to be California or wanting to be, that was the most common thing I felt that I saw when I was like, you know, exploring the wineries of, you know, North Carolina, when I was, you know, when I did dive into like a lot of the Virginia stuff, you know, trying to grow, you know, trying to make that, that really big bombastic Cabernet, or making that big, rich, buttery style Chardonnay, and really ignoring, you know, what could possibly grow. So I think, like, you know, the story of Petit Manseng, the story of Petit Verdot, you know, Tannat, you know, some of the like, you know, with, you know, some folks working with Vermentino and Nebbiolo and so on and so forth. I think that's really kind of opening, hopefully, you know, the public and as well as winemakers experience in really thinking about, like, you know, what really can help define what Virginia wine is. And I think that's why I think it's absolutely wonderful that, you know, last 2 days ago you were tasting Petit Verdot. Today we're tasting Petit Manseng. Not to take anything away from the Chardonnay we're about to taste, because I think it's also a really great Chardonnay. But I think, like, you know, not putting you know, yourself into that box and saying that, okay, this is what works well on the West Coast, and really focusing on what works best on the East Coast, what works best in this climate, what works best in these soil types, these conditions. Because, you know, you talk to a lot of, like, you know, the East Coast, you know, winemakers, and it's one of the hardest places to make wine in the world, I feel, you know, and you have to be somewhat of a slight masochist to get into making wine in this area. But I think the awards are definitely worth it if you get it just right.
Definitely. All right, cool. Let's move on to our second wine. Eileen, if you want to hang around, that's cool. No, you got to go.
I do need to go. I do just want to say that I love the Linden Hardscrabble Chardonnay, and it ages
beautiful,
incredibly well. I've had some, you know, a decade old and beautiful bottle of wine. So
yeah, we owe a lot to Jim Law for the industry that you guys work in right now. We're gonna get that. So thank you, Eileen. Thanks for coming in and
awesome.
Talking
Thanks,
about
Eileen. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right, cool. All the experts are gone,
All right, and
which
then there were two.
means, all right.
All right, two pseudo experts.
Cool.
Got it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we've got Linden here. So Linden, really, really important winery in Virginia, owned by Jim Law, and he was kind of a he was a native of Ohio, and got inspired to agriculture by being in the Peace Corps. There you go. There it is. In the Peace Corps, teaching agriculture in Africa. Went back to Ohio, and then ended up getting a job at a Virginia winery in 81, I believe it was, and ended up buying his property and planting it starting in 1983. This is basically ancient history for Virginia wine. There were a few people doing stuff down around Charlottesville in the 70s, but Jim was definitely one of the first commercial vintage, 1987. Linden is composed of 3 different vineyards. That's it. They have their estate vineyard, which is called Hardscrabble. And then they have 2 other vineyards that they source from, one nearby and one definitely much more lower elevation called Boisseau. So as you can imagine, the Boisseau vineyard wines are much more popular and much more fruity. And Hardscrabble, which is kind of a historic name of the area because it is full of just very, very rocky, poor soil, hills and valleys. And scrabble, one of the definitions of that word is to grab something like with your fingers or your toes. So if you're climbing around these rocks, you really have to scrabble at them. And it's granite based.
Got it. I thought maybe because it looked like the tiles and a Scrabble game or something.
No, Scrabble is
joke.
Is worse than hard for me, at least. I'm not any good at it, but yeah. So that's kind of where the name comes from. This was the first vineyard that they planted in '85, and it's granite based. So you get, I always find like granite, it's a really nice like rocky, really really in your face style of minerality to the wine, and it was 8 acres then, and it's now 20 acres, 5 of which are planted to Chardonnay. So these wines are always very structured, very ageable, but always delicious. And there's none in my glass, so I'm gonna fix that right now.
Yeah. So since I'm kind of like one of those dorks that always wants to follow up, when I found out that it was 5 acres and we were having the Chardonnay, I was curious, like how much of it was like those original vines planted, in '83. And I got an answer from Jim, and approximately about 1.2 hectares, or 1.2 acres, sorry, over there in America, are the original vines. And then there's another acre that was planted in '88 and '94. And usually the balance is between 4 to 11 years in this particular bottling. So yeah.
Cool.
And for the people that are like super geeky like us, the clones he selected were Wente clones. The originals were I'm not gonna go clones, but if you know anything about Wente clones, they're known for Millerandage, or commonly known as like hen and chicks. Basically, there'd be like big berries, small berries, and this is what I think a very distinction quality that really differentiates this style of Chardonnay versus some made like a Dijon clone or some other clones. Because of the uneven ripening, you get a different textural component, as well as a depth of flavor that between having those smaller berries and those larger berries offers to the wine. But I don't want to get too far ahead, so.
No, that's all good. So yeah, so this is 2015. I don't know if this is current release or not, but I know that Jim does take a lot of pride in holding the wines back a little bit. And 2015, a really, really good vintage in Virginia. And also the Linden website is fantastic. A lot of thoughtful writing from Jim on every single vintage, all the different vineyards and stuff like that. And some articles just about wine. He talks a lot about Italian wine, actually. So check it out. I'll put the link in the YouTube description after this is over. So 2015, really nothing to talk about, except that there was some storms very late in harvest. So Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot, which are the last two grapes we picked, were picked a little bit earlier than they would have liked, but the Chardonnay and the Merlot were exceptional. So lucky enough, we are sitting here with the 2015 Hardscrabble Chardonnay. Cool. Hi, do you want to kind of give us a little tasting on this guy?
Yeah, I mean, this is really kind of classic Chardonnay, I feel like, on the nose. And when I say classic, I'm talking about like, you really can smell the fruit. I think there's, there's a hint, you can tell that, there's obviously a little bit of oak and so forth, but it's not like, it's there to be an accent, as it should be. I think the fruit has this really kind of brilliant kind of freshness and ripeness to it. It's a real kind of like a citrus dominant with a little bit of accent of like, pomaceous and tropical fruit. It has a slight, subtle kind of nuttiness to it. I think really gives it a nice kind of savory quality to it. And then, you really kind of, I think what's most important about this wine is that there's this beautiful natural acidity that kind of like provides a nice kind of backbone to the entire weight and structure of it as a whole. There's a nice kind of rich mouthfeel. There's vibrant fruit. There's nice, subtle spice and a little bit of nuttiness, and it just kind of like lingers in your palate. I think it's a really great testament to wine when it has this really kind of beautiful finish and this great acidity that just makes you mouth water, and then you just like, okay, I need something here. I need a little bit of cheese, or I need a nice little, some type of food to go with it, to kind of really complement further. Not to say that you can't definitely enjoy this by itself, but it would be so much better with a nice dish right in front of you to enjoy it with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and definitely coming off of the Petit Manseng, which is much more rich and juicy, tropical. This is much more, just like, it's much more edgy. And I mean, both have really nice, healthy amount of acidity, but they're super different. Yesterday I was tasting the Petit Chardonnay on one of these live things, and he makes these really beautiful Sonoma Coast Chardonnay Pinot Noirs. And tasting it, it's just like, man, this is great. It's got this European flair to it, but
very racy.
Yeah, racy. But then tasting this today, it's almost it's even further into that spectrum. I think it's super cool to kind of see how different it is. So yeah, what else do we need to talk about? Do you want to talk a little bit more about Appalachian? Did you have any more thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aileen really kind of touched a lot of the great points. I think it's important first to figure out like what it is you're going to do. It is true that Virginia still has a very young wine culture, so I think really kind of before you start adding any more appellations, and hopefully they don't add any more, because I know that recently they've added a couple, that they really think about like what it is you have there, like what is the point of having this AVA, and does it really benefit, or does it dilute the message of what you have to offer there? I think that's also the common thing. If you think about like what's also going on in other places that already have AVAs, well-established AVAs, I think the message got a little bit muddled when they started popping up, and then now they're fixing some of those issues to really kind of go back to returning to the story of, what is this AVA supposed to tell? What is this? If you put, Monticello on a label, what does that mean? What does that mean to the consumer? What does that mean to a wine drinker in that regards? What does it mean to the winemakers that are actually in the AVA? You want, if you're going to put an AVA on your label, you want to be proud of the fact that that's on your label, and that makes sense. And it's almost like a brand. You want to protect your brand. You want the consumer that's going to buy this to understand what it is they're getting at, as opposed to being like, okay, Monticello, I don't know what that means, but it's from Virginia, I'll give it a try. I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's kind of like my thoughts on
definitely.
that.
And I was looking at Linden's website yesterday, and he actually has a really cool article written about appellations in Virginia, and it was written a number of years ago, I think 2012. But he kind of broke it down into the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm gonna share this map again in a second. But like the good, you get like a comfort, it's one thing to say that I wanted to Virginia. Virginia is a pretty big state, but it's you get a little bit more comfort if there is typicity to be had, which hopefully there is. That'll be in there. And he talks about how the old world really kind of went about it in a really great way. They started with well, at least now they're kind of starting with some bigger appellations and going into sub AVAs, and that's what he thinks the new world needs to do a little bit more. kind of like what's happening out in Sonoma right now. You have these big broad strokes, you have this big AVA that ends up being a brand, and then you can kind of, better define it with sub AVAs, which gets super confusing for, sommeliers, for, finding out wines and, studying for exams. And it's also confusing for the consumer at the same time.
Yeah.
And then he talks about the ugly, and I thought this was really interesting. So you can really see it on the map. So on the map, so you can see these are the three major appellations of Virginia. Up at the top, you have Middleburg, which is about 62 miles due west of Washington, D.C. And I don't know if you see it, Linden is right outside of it on that southwestern corner.
Yeah, I see it.
There. So they're also not in the Appalachian. And then in that green, you have the Shenandoah Valley, which is where you get up into the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then obviously the Monticello AVA, which is probably the most, at least marketing-wise, the most cohesive wine trail appellation in Virginia. But if you take a look in that northeastern part, you see the town of Rapidan. So when this AVA was created, this is according to Jim, probably the most successful winery in Virginia at the time was Rapidan River. And so there was a late in the game, maybe addition of that Rapidan finger, you kind of see it sticks up like a finger, to the AVA boundaries, so they could have, the best winery in Virginia in their AVA. This was in the early 80s, so how good were the wines? I don't know. But it's definitely something to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about AVAs and stuff like that. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but unfortunately it does. I don't know those wines at all. I don't think the winery exists anymore. So I don't have any comments on that. But that's kind of an interesting story I thought to share about AVAs, stuff like that. Yeah.
So I know I'm probably I know I'm probably preaching to the choir and so on and so forth, but I figure if there's anyone out there that's listening and so on and so forth that's thinking about Virginia wines or talking about, I think if you are a wine buyer or you're a wine lover, you should, always keep your mind open to everything. When it comes to food and so on and so forth, we're always talking about, eating local, supporting local and so forth. And I don't see why we shouldn't do the same when it comes to beverage as well. I think there's definitely a place at the table, in your glass for, whether it be a local beer, or whether it be a local cider, or whether it be a local wine. Definitely, don't rule it out just because it's not a well-established appellation. There's amazing people out there that are doing amazing things. As we can see from just these two wines that we tasted, they're really great examples of what they are. They're varietally correct. They're well made. They really showcase, what they're doing and what the potential it is. And if you don't open yourself up to that, you miss out on a great opportunity to explore something, and at the same time support, your independent businesses and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's. So I was going to say, I think that this whole local thing, and with this whole COVID-19 situation we're all living through right now, if this lasts, for a long time, we're talking about supply chains breaking down. Postal system stuff, all this stuff. No need to go into all the details, but I think local is going to be super important. People are going to be driving 2 hours to a winery before they're flying, across the country to go to California or Oregon or Washington or wherever wine tourism might have been centered before. The same thing with food. I think local farms are going to be really important. So I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how this happens. And I have a hope that, one good thing that comes out of this is that particularly for Virginia wine. But we'll see. Hopefully we all get out there. We all get through this, as unscathed as possible, of course. But
I think you really are kind of
seeing
it. Like we've already seen it like in Pennsylvania as a whole, especially because of the fact that, for those of you who don't know that, our Commonwealth is a monopoly state. So the PLCB controls everything. And when the mandate went down for things to shut down, stay at home, the PLCB was one of those that decided to shut down and stay at home. So there was no way for anybody to get alcohol. Yeah, so there's no way for anybody to get alcohol unless you were willing to cross state lines, which is technically illegal. because you're not really supposed to go across and bring alcohol back in. So it was approximately about 2 to 3, almost 3 weeks before they, actually almost a month, I feel, before they started to loosen it a little bit and start opening online ordering. But during that period of time, the loophole was that, that the local wineries and breweries could deliver. So there was definitely a surge in sport, and really people started drinking locally and so forth. And I think that, that was also, I guess that's one of the silver linings of all this, and how everything went down. And I'm hoping that other states had the same situation, but I know our situation was quite unique. But I know a lot of local wineries and breweries definitely benefited from our PLCB system being shut down, so that way no one had access to any alcohol. So they got their local wines. Also, distilleries were selling and so forth. So and also practicing social distancing practices. But with that being said, I want to just mention, like, again, one of the things, the positive things about all this is that, you said earlier, I'm trying to break a record of sitting the most seminars and so forth. But I think it's forced a lot of us to kind of be creative, think outside the box. And I think it's also, even though we're further apart, we actually are closer than I think a lot of us have ever been before. Because, think about it, like last time I talked to you, Win, was probably at the MS exam, and since then we really, we kind of keep in and out of touch. But
in person. Yeah, in person.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. And occasionally we'll drop a line here and there. But I think, like, this is giving us opportunities to connect on a different level. And I was thinking about, like, and I was listening to, for example, a podcast interview with Dorley Murr, who is a winemaker, winery owner in the Carnuntum in Austria, and she said that, like, one of the most amazing things about what this all happened is, because of the fact that everybody now has free time, everyone has an hour out of their day and so forth. So easy to just jump onto a Zoom call and listen to someone talk about wine and so forth, or taste wine with them, than it used to be. Because I'm sure your day used to be really busy. There's things you had to do at the restaurant. There's things you had to do throughout your day. How can you squeeze out an hour out of your day to go to so and so convention center or an embassy or whatever it is for a tasting? And if you did, usually you're rushed. You're like, okay, I have 30 minutes. This is how much time I can do. And go from there. I think it's allowed us to kind of slow down, prioritize, and connect in a great way. So, so whoever's still on listening, so forth, thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed what we had to talk about. I think it's really great. Thanks for inviting me to come on and talk a little bit of Virginia wine with you. It's a little fun to be able to share a little bit of our passion and why we like these wines and why we want to talk about them and spend an hour out of our day to talk about it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, man. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching. YouTube says there's still 11 people watching us, plus the 1,000 that are not logged in, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally.
Show everyone your shirt. I just noticed that. It's a pretty smart shirt. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, man.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Hit up Hai on Instagram if you want to see every single wine education thing that's going on the internet right now. Check out my YouTube channel for some wine tasting and some stuff like that. I'm going to do some wine trivia also coming up here soon, so that'll be fun. So awesome. Thank you guys for watching. Drink some.
So you're doing it every
wine.
Sunday?
Sunday was not very well attended, so I'm maybe thinking about changing up the time for it.
I'm game. I want. Let me know, man. If I don't
think too
respond
many
or like
people
you,
were watching,
just
I think too many people were watching the Chicago Bulls documentary last week.
Oh yeah. So, well, what you do? What time did you do at 8 o'clock or something?
8:45 Eastern.
Yeah, that's right. It's at 9 o'clock, right?
I'm trying. Eastern. Yeah, I'm trying to just try to find a good time for East Coasters, West Coasters. 8:45 is not good for any of our European friends, probably. But yeah, we'll get it going. So thanks, Hai. Good talking to you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Be in touch soon. Thank you. Bye.